Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, and if you are new here, welcome. I'm Libby and I am back today with my favourite books of 2020. So I've been trying really hard to choose my top 10 books from the 50 that I read in 2020, and it's actually been really hard. I've sort of changed it around a few times, so I've stuck with the 10 that I've got now, but there definitely were some other books I absolutely loved as well. So I've been asked a few times to do a little bit more book content, so I thought this was a great time to do it, seeing as I've finished my reading challenge from last year and I'm moving on to reading for this year now. So I am going to run you through my top 10 that I have picked out. I just want to preface this video with that I have tried my best to sort of speak about them, but I don't think I come from a particular place of qualification. Like, I'm a law student, so I've tried my best to give these as good a review as possible. But yeah, like, if you want to read more about them, definitely head to Goodreads and stuff like that. But these are like my general feelings and things that I picked up on when I was reading them. So I'm going to start with a really popular one that I actually loved, which was Girl, Woman, Other. It jointly won the Man Booker in 2019, I believe. I will read you the blurb. So this is Britain as you've never read it. This is Britain as it has never been told. From the top of the country to the bottom, across more than a century of change and growth and struggle and life, Girl, Woman, Other follows 12 very different characters on an entwined journey of discovery. It is future, it is past, it is fiction, it is history. It is a novel about who we are now. So it follows the life and struggles of 12 very different characters, mostly women, black and British. They tell the stories of their families, friends and lovers across the country and through the years. So I immediately loved the style of how this was written. So it follows the life of different generations of women from all different backgrounds, and then how their lives sort of converge and their paths cross throughout the narrative as well in quite clever ways. Found it really moving. Definitely covered like a broad spectrum of narrative voices. I found it really accessibly written as well for like the winner of Man Booker, because sometimes they can be quite like literature-y, but this was definitely like accessible, quite readable, and yeah, really enjoyable to read. So overall, I absolutely love this one. I would highly recommend it. I'm sure you've seen it everywhere already, so if you haven't read it, I would definitely recommend giving this one a read. So the next one I'm going to talk about, which was one of my absolute favourites, like this has really stuck with me, Who Killed My Father by Edward Louis. It is really short. It's like 88 pages, I think. Got quite big words as well, but it fits so much in such a short space. It's really moving, really powerful. It's autobiographical, and I think it's set in sort of rural France, and Edward comes from a working class family in France, and it's an indictment of politics in that it's literally about how specific policies impacted his father's life, ultimately sort of led to his death, which is, I think, because I'm so interested in that side of the law and that sort of thing in general, this really spoke to me. It really stuck out. I just really enjoyed reading this one, and my brother also read it and he said the same. So that should mean that even if you're not as committed and invested in the sort of politics and social justice side of it, that you should still think it's an enjoyable and valuable book as well. Not necessarily enjoyable, but like really appreciate it as a piece of literature. It wouldn't take you more than like an evening or two to read as well, because it's so short, but honestly, like, it fits so much in there. So if I remember rightly, it covers sort of themes of the father-son relationship, of class, politics, homophobia. But yeah, I would highly recommend this one if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, because this one has really stuck with me, and I think I'll probably read it again at some point as well. I have also read 2 of his other books, which I think might mean that I've read all of his books since, but this one was definitely the best for me. The next one that I'm going to talk about is Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. You might have already read it, but it is Maya Angelou's 7 volumes of autobiography are a testament to the talents and resilience of this extraordinary writer. Loving the world, she also knows its cruelty. As a black woman, she has known discrimination and extreme poverty, but also hope and joy, achievement and celebration. In this first volume of her autobiography, Maya Angelou beautifully evokes her childhood with her grandmother in the American South of the 1930s. She learns the power of white folks at the other end of town and suffers the terrible trauma of rape by her mother's lover. Although this was definitely sad in places, I found it quite like a hopeful novel at the end. I really liked this book, and I'm definitely going to read the next ones at some point in the near future, so I would definitely recommend reading this. The next book that I'm going to talk about is There by Tommy Orange, which is the story of different Native American characters and how their stories, how their lives all sort of like converge to this powwow in Oakland and the sort of events leading up to it, and then the events at the powwow as well. So I think this was a little bit of a slow starter, but once I got into it I really liked it. So it explores themes of identity and the displacement of modern Indigenous people. It covers issues of suicide, domestic violence and addiction. So it's not the lightest of novels, but I think it was beautifully written. I really enjoyed reading all of the different stories and then how that they all came together throughout and sort of like at the end, at the climax of the book at the end. And also it's a perspective that I've never really read before. I don't think I've read any Native American Indian authors before, so I really enjoyed reading from another perspective. I always try and read sort of like a broad range of literature to sort of empathise with and understand and read from different perspectives. So I really enjoyed this one, and it has sort of stayed with me since, so I think that's always quite a good sign. So the next book that I'm going to talk about is a classic, keeping it a nice broad range of types of book for you, but I wasn't expecting to enjoy this as much as I did. It is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, which I'm sure a lot of people have read. It might even be compulsory on some lit courses, I don't know, but I really did enjoy this one. I found it very like escapist. It's a romantic novel. It's even been described as sort of like a feminist work or like a feminist character of its time. It's a classic Victorian romance, which I honestly didn't think I would enjoy. Like, I don't think I love romance, but I think I might be lying to myself a little bit because I really did enjoy this one. Her childhood, which I think is probably a little bit slower at the beginning, and then her romance with Rochester a little bit later in the book. But yeah, if you like classics, romance, want to read more classics, I think this is definitely like quite accessible as well. There are some problematic characterizations in here, but obviously if you read it with a critical brain, which you should read anything with, like perhaps read some commentary on it afterwards. But yeah, the next one that I'm going to talk about is another non-fiction, which is Everyday Sexism. So this was a project I believe started by Laura Bates. It sort of started a trend of women coming forward with their experiences of everyday sexism, and it really does make you realise how commonplace the instances of sexism that women face, that we face sort of every day, and like the implications of it. There's not a huge amount of theory in it. There is some which I definitely did learn from, but because I've already studied a lot of the theory, like rape myths and sexual offences theory and things like that in law, this was sort of supplementary, and I think it really made me understand like how vast the issue is, and it really makes you contextualise your own experiences within this vast sort of array of other women's experiences and realise that it's not sort of isolated incidences, and that these things that happen belong in like a wider context, and that obviously they shouldn't be happening. I personally found it quite sad and like upsetting, but ultimately it is like a call to action and a call for change, which is really important. And I think it is really important because the public perception of like sexism, sexual assault, rape and things like that really doesn't necessarily align with the reality of it. So it highlights the way that gender equality really does benefit everyone, and I think if I could get my male friends to read this, or if you are a man, I think it would be so valuable to read this. Women experience these things every day. Like, I think this is just such a valuable book to read, man or woman. The amount of times I've had to actually like convince someone that the gender pay gap exists. I think it would be so nice if a guy took it upon themselves to read this and empathise and understand. Genuinely, I have had conversations with like boys and my housemates and things, and I think until you speak to boys, they really don't realise the extent to which these things are actual realities that do have a genuine impact on our lives. So yeah, overall I think this is a really valuable book to read, and I would recommend it to anyone. So the next book that I'm going to talk about is Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, which I'm sure again a lot of you have heard of, and I think sales went through the roof when the Black Lives Matter movement really gained traction. I actually read this in 2017 for the first time, but I reread it with all of the events that were happening to sort of refresh my mind, and this one is the book that sparked national conversation, exploring everything from eradicated black history to the inextricable link between class and race. Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race is the essential handbook for anyone who wants to understand race relations in Britain today. So a lot of this that's covered, I don't think we're very much taught about Black British history, or I personally wasn't aware of most things in this book. So I think that this is great to read from a British perspective, because a lot of books on racism, or a lot of things that we learn about about or things that we watch are from a very American perspective, so I would highly recommend reading this. And then also from a more American perspective is How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi, very much expressing the sentiment that was so big in the Black Lives Matter movement, which is that it's not enough to be simply not racist, you have to be actively anti-racist. And I learned a lot from this book. I would definitely recommend reading this one. I'm really sorry if you were looking for like a lot of fiction, but most of them that I've picked out are non-fiction as my favourite books of 2020. I will perhaps look into doing like a my favourite fiction book video if that's something you'd be interested in, but yeah, obviously we can see where my interests lie. So the next book is The Gendered Brain by Gina Rippon. So it's the new neuroscience that shatters the myth of the female brain. Reading maps or reading emotions, Barbie or Lego, we live in a gendered world where we are bombarded with messages about sex and gender. On a daily basis we face deeply ingrained beliefs that your sex determines your skills and preferences, from toys and colours to career choice and salaries. But what does this constant gendering mean for our thoughts, decisions and behaviour, and what does it mean for our brains? Drawing on her work as Professor of Cognitive Neuroimaging, Gina Rippon unpacks the stereotypes that bombard us from our earliest moments and shows how these messages mould our ideas of ourselves and even shape our brains. Taking us back through centuries of sexism, The Gendered Brain reveals how science has been misinterpreted or misused to ask the wrong questions. Instead of challenging the status quo, we are still bound by outdated stereotypes and assumptions. Rigorous, timely and liberating, The Gendered Brain has huge repercussions for women and men, for parents and children, businesses and schools, and for how we identify ourselves. So that very much sums up the book. But for me, I found it a little bit repetitive at points, but I found the whole thing really illuminating. I think it just really confirmed a lot of the thoughts that I already had, and just like confirmed a lot of things that I knew I already thought, but really like backed them up. Shows how sort of the toys that you play with, it genuinely like shapes how your brain works and how practicing certain skills will change how your brain works. So toys can genuinely influence how brains develop and things like that, which I had already read about a little bit before, but it was really interesting to read in more depth. Basically, I think the main sort of gist of the book is that there aren't any biologically meaningful differences in male and female brains. I found this quite an important book because I think I've internalised that girls aren't as good as boys at certain things just from a really young age, and even though I might know that that's not true, this really like confirmed it for me. It also spoke about sort of like stereotype threat, where if you are told that a group that you belong to are better at something, you perform better at it. So yeah, I found this like really like affirming and valuable to read, and it also provides you with quite good ammunition when you're trying to argue with people who tell you that women are better at looking after children and things like that. Yeah, so yeah, I would highly recommend reading this one. I took a lot away from it, and I didn't only learn from it, it sort of made me change the way I think a little bit, and it kind of felt like a bit of an affirmation of things reading this for me personally. So I would highly recommend that if that sounds like something of interest to you. And the last book that I'm going to speak about was probably my absolute favourite, which was Becoming by Michelle Obama. All the time from her childhood all the way to her time, the end of her time in the White House, and I just think she's such an incredible writer, such an incredible woman. Like, it really inspired me. She used to work in a law firm as well, she used to be a lawyer, and I think I related to a lot of the struggles that she had in her younger professional sort of like studying and all of that life. And yeah, I absolutely loved it. I would highly recommend it, and I found it really inspiring, and now I completely understand why people love her so much, because I just loved that book so much. I would highly recommend it. And that is my final book. So I really hope you've enjoyed the video. Let me know if you'd like to see more of a fictions recommendation book from me, or if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more of it. Don't forget to hit the like button so I know that you enjoyed it. But yeah, I really hope you found that enjoyable, or you will take away some book recommendations from that. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.